good to see you.
Yeah, so good to see you. Thank you so much for joining this talk with me. It's a
Oh, you're
big
very welcome.
it's a big pleasure, big honor to have you here, and
Uh,
thank you so much.
yeah, thanks. You're welcome. You're
Oh.
welcome. It looks really good, your background there. My background is a little blank, but
Thank you. Your background is great.
okay.
your light looks like a trombone. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's right next to I have my digital keyboard back there. So
Nice, Walter.
I
So,
have a little studio here, so I can't really keep a real piano in the studio with the neighbors.
that's great. That's great. So, we are live streaming on Instagram, and I just want to thank you so much for participating. This talk usually has a duration of 1 hour because the Instagram cuts down then. And
Uh,
so I would like to start, saying that are one of the most important and influent conductors of what I've been calling of conducted improvisation, and that's great. That's great. And maybe
thank
you could start talking a little bit about your trajectory and where you find yourself today in your career.
Yeah, it's interesting because I never thought if I was to go back to the 70s when I created sound painting, and if I was to go back that far and then to look from that moment to here, if there was some way to do that, then then I would not see myself so like involved and entrenched and you know um, taken over by sound painting.
Uh-huh.
I had imagined that I was going to be my training is in composing for contemporary music, uh, and I mean I have a background in the other disciplines too. So I thought in the future I would be composing a lot for different groups, orchestras, etc., always involving improvisation as part of the composition as much as possible.
Mhm.
And that's what I'd be doing today, playing my instruments, piano and woodwinds and other percussion instruments I play. But I never thought of myself when I first, created sound painting. I never thought that what I would do is be a live composer because it really at that time didn't even exist. That even the phrase didn't really exist, a live composer, except for specifying a composer is still alive, but instead of a dead composer. But so I never thought about that this is where it would be today, and that something like sound painting would open my mind into different ways of composing that I never thought existed.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I'm sure that after all these years creating all this great thing you did, you have changed a lot. Your mind must have changed a lot. The way you think, the way you see music, and that's super interesting. And something that I want to talk today as well is about community. And you achieved a higher level of community with what you've been doing because you influence so many people all around the globe, uh, all continents, and this community building is great that you've done. So
thanks.
I I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe for the people watching that maybe don't know. I mean, I created sound painting in 1974, and it was really in a moment of frustration where I had a composition I was conducting, and there were improvisers in the group, and so I needed to communicate behind an improviser that wasn't following the rules of improvising in my composition. So that's when I created a few signs. And so I never thought about I didn't think that much about sound painting
Hmm.
for a lot of years until I moved down from Woodstock, New York, to New York City. And then again, it was a community of musicians. I was working with really great players, you know, and This is in the 1980s. And I mean, there was a community in the sense that we all came together to do my compositions and sound painting. But it wasn't really until the late 90s when I started to open up sound painting to working with dancers and actors. And since I have a background in those disciplines and also visual arts, I was able to adapt, and codify the language for those disciplines. And then all of a sudden, the community started to come together in a different way. Here I was like working with dancers and actors and understanding their language because I was the musical director for the Irondale Ensemble, a great theater company based in New York. And so I was their musical director for a long time. So I was involved in theater and involved with dancers and everything, but that was like separate projects, And then all of a sudden, as I developed sound painting to be multidisciplinary, the community of people I was working with really opened up. And sound painting has a way of breaking down the barriers between the disciplines. And then, so it was starting to build in the sense of community at this point. But I think what really kind of opened it up was when I took it into education. And that's when I realized that, when we go to learn an instrument, or as children, we're all creative, right? Equally creative. All children are creative. And if they want to learn something like dance or an instrument or be an actor, that's an obstacle in the way of the creativity, right? It's in the way, in a sense. It's wonderful to learn an instrument, but it's still, you're measured, You're not measured by who you are. You're measured by what you can accomplish on this instrument. And for me, all people are equally creative. So as I took sound painting into education, I started to discover and realize and kind of wake up to that it's a tool for revealing for revealing creativity in each person. And then the sense of community really opened up, because as I took sound painting into education, this is when I realized how much I could, when it came back to my art and being a composer, I could put anybody together. So if I wanted to have just talk about musicians for a minute, I could put any type of musician together, whether it's a folk musician, a rap musician, a jazz musician, a free improviser, a classical musician, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, from all different cultures. And with the same language, be able to create a composition, and also that they're contributing in order for the composition to work. Sound painting is making art with people. So the more you are yourself, the more you find your way into sound painting. It's all about like who you are. You know what I mean? It's not about what I want you to do with my composition. If I wrote you a composition, here it's what it is, you have to play this, right? That's the idea, right? You play what I wrote. No, I give you an empty box, which is a sign, and then you fill it with who you are within the parameters of what this empty box or sign is supposed to be. Except, of course, if you make a mistake, who cares? You keep going with the mistake, right? So this is a foundation for composition or education, but just speaking composition for a minute, creates a community, because it puts us all on an equal level, so that a child, a 10-year-old, 13-year-old, whatever, 14-year-old can sit next to a professional performer, and in the hands of a skilled sound painter, a fluent sound painter, you can make a wonderful piece.
Yeah.
And so the idea of community opens up in a whole different way.
Yeah.
Because it's all about everybody can learn a language, right? We all learn languages, our mother tongue, so to speak. So everybody can learn the second language. And this, for me, because sound painting is a language which reveals creativity, community just follows right after that,
Yeah, and one thing that I find super interesting in sound painting is about the language, because the language determinate a way of thinking, and because you think in one language. And when I was meeting a lot of sound painters around the world, I understood that when they were sound painting, or talking about sound painting, they were thinking sound painting. They were and everybody could understand each other because they were thinking in the same language. And this language aspect is so interesting. I would like you to develop a little bit about what you think about language wise.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm understanding the question right, steer me in the right direction if I'm wrong. But so for example, like I've come back, I've always been a player. You know, I play piano was my first instrument, but I studied for a long time woodwinds and always playing piano and percussion and everything. So now the past maybe 10 years or so, or 15 years, I've come back to my instrument, the piano. And 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 I've been playing a lot with other players who know sound painting, doing recordings and whatnot. And just like what you're saying is that we have a language already.
Hmm.
So when we go to do open form improvisation, some people say free improvisation. I prefer open form. So as we go to open form improvisation, we have a common language.
Hmm.
So the way that we just are naturally going to approach the improvisation is based on this common language.
Hmm.
Like a jazz musician may have the common language of, the study of chord structures and, or the study of styles and whatnot. And people that know sound painting have something similar in that way. It also changes how you think about your work as an artist.
Hmm.
You're after all these years of being in front of the group and sound painting and creating compositions in the moment, when I really came back to my instrument in a very strong way, where I was practicing many hours every day, I mean, I had changed a lot. I've always been an improviser, but my approach to improvisation really changed because of all the structures that I work with in sound painting.
Hmm.
So how if something like we're playing together, and then all of a sudden if you play something, not that there's necessarily one has to be able to do this, but I can put that in a sign. I can say, okay, that Guilherme is playing that sign right now. What
Hmm.
he's playing is that, or he's doing background, or maybe he's doing a minimalism, or maybe he's doing a pointillistic relate to, or maybe he's, whatever, so everything that anybody plays or does or whatever, there's a sign that relates to it. So it gives you more of an insight into what's happening in the moment without reflecting on it, just responding.
Yeah.
So that gives structure in a different way,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, definitely, definitely. I totally agree. And this thing you were saying about a lexicon of words or concepts that determinate our way of thinking. That was specifically what I meant by talking that a language build up your own way of thinking. And well, I know that because it's a big community, and as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is still is an ongoing project, an ongoing and ever spreading language. And also because of the orality of the structure of sound painting, because people exchange a lot. I know you do the think tanks, and well, it's very very nice to see how this evolves. And I wish to know if you hope or if you think how this or how do you think this can evolve, or how do you where do you think this will stop?
Well, I hope it never stops. But of course, I'm biased. I created it, of course, so I want it to go on. But if I go all the way back to when I first started to teach, Sarah Weaver, Todd Reynolds were the Jennifer Rayfeld, Sabine Vogel, Francois Genot, Vincent Lequang, these were some of the first people that learned sound painting. But at that point, I was open to give it away.
Mhm.
But in the very beginning, but just the first two or three people, they used to have to sign a contract with me. I'm from New York City, right? So my good friend of mine, a very powerful New York City lawyer, was like, "Hey, you need to protect this. You need to make money from this." And I hadn't thought about that, and I thought, yeah, well, okay. So we registered, we trademarked, we did all this stuff. This is like the early '90s, right? The
Hmm.
language had really developed a lot at this point, and then so for 2 or 3 years, you had to sign a contract with me if you wanted to use it. It's kind of like Bertolt Brecht used to have his friends sign contracts. That's like a crazy thing to do. You don't have your friends sign a contract. So anyway, after about 2 years of that, I thought this is foolish.
Hmm.
This is a language, and one person cannot own a language.
Hmm.
So I've really grown with this as it's gone out in the world, and as I let it go at this point, I said, okay, enough of the trademark, enough of the registering, enough of that stuff. Let me just let it go. It's not about making money. I'm not a capitalist. I'm not interested in that. No, sure, I got to make a living, but I'm not interested in doing that with sound painting. I was more interested in let me let it go and see what happens to it. So I let it out into the world, and it caught on very quickly, and lots of people started using it and hiring me to come give workshops, etc. And then in the early 2000s, as it was really starting to spread, there are hundreds of people around the world. Uh, and of course, thanks to people like, Sabine Vogel and Sarah and Jennifer Rayfelt and Francois Genot, great proponents of the language, spreading it around. So it wasn't just me anymore. These other people were also teaching. And as this started to happen, I had to grow because it was my baby, right? I created this thing, and all of a sudden I could see little slight changes happening with the language,
Hmm.
you know, and and this is what language does. I think around in the 1700s, I believe that there was a committee in France that tried to control the French language. It fell apart,
Huh.
right? You can't control language. That's a silly endeavor. It's a fool's endeavor. You can't control language. It's changing all the time. So I looked at the English language,
Hmm.
and because I needed to understand like how languages develop. So I looked at the English language, which was almost like it like wiped off the earth back in the 1500s.
Hmm.
And because in England, the language of the royalty was French. So today, English has more than 5,000 French words in it, 3,000 Spanish words, Arabic words, Swedish words. It's a sponge, you know.
Hmm.
So I started using the English language as kind of a model to help me look at what might happen to sound painting,
Hmm.
you know, that it's going to develop no matter what I do, and that I need to grow with it and not try to like stay old school with it, you know. Like as people are developing it, I need to learn what they're doing. I want to know what they're doing because that's why I let it go.
Hmm.
So that's been I would say that's been one of the most instructive things is for me as a composer. Is once I let it go, now I'm a student of the language.
Hmm.
I'm no longer the creator. I am the creator, I mean, but I'm no longer, like the guy in charge,
Hmm.
in the sense.
Hmm.
It belongs to you. It's a language, so it belongs to everybody. So if it's really going to be a language, it needs to belong to whoever wants to learn it. And so, yeah, so I've really had to grow with it. And I find that it's fascinating to see what happens and go, whoa, I never thought of that before. Maybe I come to see you sound paint and you do something because of who you are. And I've never thought of that kind of combination. That's going to happen
Hmm.
because you're different than I am, than the next person. So for me, that's fascinating.
That's fascinating indeed. Yes, and I got curious about one thing that I don't know if it happens, but uh, is there any word or sign in sound painting that means something that can't be said in English? I mean, some word that it comes from a different language or something like that.
I mean, there are gestures that let me see if I can answer that question. Um, I had to use the English language to name the signs. You know, let's say you walk into a classroom and you're teaching a class of improvisation, and you just say to the class, "Okay, whole group, play." Right? Everybody would play. That means, okay, everybody start improvising, right? A somewhat advanced class or somewhat advanced would improvise, right? If you say in sound painting, whole group play, whole group play, that means nothing. So the English language is used to name the signs, but it doesn't necessarily mean what the sign is. I didn't want to create a brand new like nonsense language that would be ridiculous, too much work. So I mean, it's like just signs like anaphora, which is a poetry term. Anaphora, anaphora. It's a poetry term, and I changed the meaning of that. That it's not what it is in poetry. It's something different in sound painting, and something like a gesture that's called play can't play now. It used to be called if you played you can't play, but today it's called play can't play. And in just the swirl of a hand, and to go back to your question, I was teaching at a university in the United States a few years ago, and part of my residence was to go visit other classes. So I visited a language class, where they're, linguistics, where they're studying language. And there was a woman in there, a student that was very fluent in American Sign Language. And she actually got really annoyed with me. What I was doing was teaching the class the sound painting language. I had to use them as a chorus so they could understand what this meant. You have to really do it to really understand it. It's like if you've never heard French before, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't explain it to you unless I spoke it. I couldn't describe it. You can't describe Picasso's Guernica. You just can't describe things. So anyway, here I am turning the class into a chorus in this linguistics class, and this young woman who knew sign language got really angry with me because why don't you just say that with the American Sign Language? Why do you have to go create some other new language? That seems superfluous to me. I mean, what's the point? And I said in this one sign, in play can't play, that's it in the dictionary and in the workbooks and stuff, or if I was just describing it in the workshop, I can work 2 hours on just that one sign. There's so many different parameters to that sign. So if I'm answering your question, I think, just one sign itself can be something simple like long tone or pointillism or minimalism or speaking or air sounds. But then there are other signs that comprise a number of parameters that, that may seem simple to just do that. But what you have to do in order to teach that is another thing altogether. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it's a great answer, of course. Well, you were mentioning early about structure and form, and in I know it's you can't really describe how is to play sound paint, how is to sound paint and understand the language without doing that, but maybe you could describe how sound painting helped you to create a technique or a point of view as a composer for a structure and form, how it influenced your composition, and if you have any tips about composition, structure and form.
It absolutely influenced my composition. And I was lucky that back in the 70s, I studied with the great composer Anthony Braxton for 8 years.
Wow.
Fantastic musician, performer, fantastic composer. Just hands down, one of the greatest living composers. And one of the things that Anthony did, that he took and he looked at improvisation because he told me that one time when he played a solo saxophone piece on alto saxophone, he could play for about 10 minutes and then he fell apart. He couldn't think of what next to do, you know? So he kind of like fell flat on his face, and he went back home, and he thought about, okay, it's not like the piano where you have all this, you know, harmony, rhythm, all kinds of stuff you can do, melody, throw all this stuff together. A single line instrument like a saxophone, Anthony is thinking, well, what can I do? And so he created what is now called language musics, but he took and he broke down improvisation into its parts for him, what was improvisation that and he broke that down to like about 15 different parts, more or less. And then he came back to his soloing on saxophone, and was able to apply that and be able to like develop within one of those parameters instead of just flying all over the place, going here and there and here and there. And now he was able to really focus on something and then develop that and move that into someplace else. And he was also doing the same with his composition. So I was studying with him, you know. So even though it wasn't Anthony that gave me the idea for sound painting, it was my studying with him that supported that I had created this thing with signs, you know, created this language with signs just in a moment. And then, so the capacity and the ability to be able to ask for a block of pointillism, a block of this, a block of that, thinking more in blocks is block composing, right? Instead of linear composition, but just think a block of an idea, a block of another idea, a block of another idea. And sound painting, which is one of the things I was very interested in composition, in notation. And so sound painting helped that enormously, not only to write in a more traditional way, but also to write in you know, alternate notation. So and Anthony Braxton also did a lot of alternate notation. So I was just, you know, lucky to be you know, studying with him at the time that I came up with sound painting, because it really helped support it. And as the years went on, as I developed sound painting into a real composing language, because earlier on it was for guiding improvisation behind soloist. And then I recognized in the late 80s that it had become a composing language, that I really could do all of these things with it that I wanted to do, that I could write. But I could, with the same ability, I could sit down at the piano and improvise something, or a saxophone and improvise something in that moment. So improvisation for me is composition. It's just fast composing. So in a way that you can compose really quickly with an instrument as you're improvising, I all of a sudden had the capacity and the ability to do that with a group, to be able to compose in real time as quickly as I could, playing it on my instrument, or, you know. So this opened a whole new world up for me. And then when I went back to notation, to doing more notation, just like it affected my playing on the piano and woodwinds, as I went back to notation, it affected very much the way that I wrote. And so now when I write what we call palettes, which are sections of just speaking music, but sections of notation that I'm going to use, I write them specifically for a sign, for example. So now I come back to sound painting and I say, oh, okay, I'm going to write a point-to-point palette, or I'm going to write a minimalism palette, or I'm going to write a palette that specifically works well with play, can't play. Or I'm going to write one that works specifically really, really super well with scanning. So now I write for the gesture. And that's something I never thought of 20-something years ago, is to write for the sign, because the sign lends itself, you know, to a palette in a way that, say, writing without referencing a sign would do. So it's really fascinating, because then you take the sign itself and the palette, which is written specifically for the sign, the exploration of that notation that you've done is vast. I mean, you can go all over the place just with one measure, so to speak, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
So
that's super interesting. Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, and well, still about notation and the gestures and concepts, the directives. Uh, how do I put that? I think as you said in the beginning of this talk, sound painting also collaborated to analysis of music. So you can now look at to written music and then set up some concepts that your language have have shaped these concepts, and then you can now look into music and divide it into several concepts of sound painting, and that's
Uh,
very interesting.
That's right, and that's right, and in a way, that's directly related to what I was saying about what Anthony Braxton was doing. You know, like he took uh, some of the basic elements of improvisation, then gave them a name. And yes, I've done this with different people, like Etienne Roland, with Jennifer Rayfeld, with Julian, and we look at like a score of Xenakis or something,
Hmm.
and say, okay, how would you sound paint that? You know,
Uh-huh.
how could you sound paint something that's not exactly the same thing, because otherwise you just buy the music and play it. But how would you sound paint something to come up with this? What would be the phrase to get something that's the same type of structure?
Hmm.
And that's fascinating, to take the language and then look at something that's fixed, like a composition, and say, okay, how do I do this?
Yeah.
And you can absolutely you can do it. It's I mean, sometimes it's difficult and sometimes it's not so difficult, but it's really fascinating to look at a score and then recreate that score with sound painting. Vincent Lequang, great sound painter, a teacher at the Paris Conservatoire, the Superior in Paris, the big one.
Hmm.
He runs a tape. So when he's teaching sound painting, he'll run like a minute of something he's pre-recorded, right? Obviously, and then there's a minute of silence. So the sound painter, the student, hears a minute of music, and then has to recreate that with the signs in the next minute.
Hmm.
So it's like
Wow.
it's like here it is, recreated. Here it is, recreated. Here it is, recreated.
Wow.
So there's a lot of exploration into that, and we've done quite a bit of that type of thing in the think tanks, these
Yeah.
conferences.
I got interested in what you said, because when you try to recreate what you just heard, you can recreate the structure of it, but or you can recreate exactly what happened. So, and there's a big gap between those two things.
Right.
Yeah, and well, I want to share one story with you, and really uh, want to know what you think about time and in sound painting, because when I first started doing sound painting in back 2010, I the first thing I did was to sound paint seven visual artists and visual artists only. So we did a mural, a big mural in 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 a studio there, and the most impressive thing is that it took 9 hours of work. So we've been preparing for 3 hours, and we've been playing for 6 hours in a row, and
Wow.
only then uh, we found it was ready. So because of that, I thought a lot about how disciplines have different timing for each approach. If you are of course you can do music and visual arts and dance and all together, but how do you think that the language sound painting can be expanded beyond this, beyond the concert space, because uh, I thought it was very interesting experience, but it was a very huge time, and we didn't feel it. It was, because the artists were used to work in that time base. So it's interesting. I wonder if you have any considerations about time.
Absolutely. I mean, it one of the things, just to address the more practical part, and then the kind of the more sort of like not mystical, but I don't understand why this happens part of it, is that when you're working with the different disciplines, like a musician can respond very quickly to like a scan or a hit or a point to point. So can anybody working with sound, usually an actor. A dancer's response comes, they have to get the body going, and then the body has to come and relax back. So as far as time goes, and for the composer, it's a bit like what's going on today with Zoom. There's lag. So we're working with the Zoom group, and when I give a hit, it's it's more like a pointillistic hit. It's not all together, just because of the lag from the different countries. So there's a lag in the sense you're working with visual artists and dancers. From the practical side, like a visual artist might not be ready for something. So you have to set parameters and defaults and rules that say you can either come in a little bit later or wait for the next sign, all of these kinds of things. So from the practical side, working with visual artists or working with dancers is the composer has to be, the multidisciplinary composer has to be very well aware of the capacity of the discipline. So that aside, a very strange kind of byproduct, if you will, of sound painting is innate ability to give one a sense of time they have never had before. So you don't think, like you say, next thing you know, the time had gone by when you were doing your piece with the visual artist. It kind of just flew by. I tell people all the time when I'm working in a university or something in a music department or multidisciplinary group or whatever, and they've been working all week with me, and now they're ready for the performance. But some of them are a little embarrassed because they don't know what their friends are going to think. One is I say, don't worry, people are gonna trust me. They're gonna have a good time. There's so much unknown going on. My daughter just she's not by. My daughter came. Guilherme says hi. Yeah, ta det. Vad är det? Vad ska? Yeah, ta vad du vill. Sorry. So
no problem.
So I would say so I'm getting ready to I'm telling them, don't worry, your friends are going to take a new path they haven't gone down. And it's my experience that most people really enjoy this, and because it's something different. They don't know what's going to happen. It's unexpected. And I say to them, and the piece is going to be an hour long, because at this point in all our rehearsals and classes and whatnot, we've done things that are like 10 minutes long. It's going to be an hour long. Oh no, I could never survive that. I said, trust me, it's going to feel like 15 minutes. And they're like, I know that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's crazy. End of the concert, sometimes they ask them or they come up to me that they say, it's over? I said, yeah, it's an hour. No, it's not. I said, yes, it is. Look at your phone,
Yeah.
And an hour goes by just like that, So it has this weird ability to warp time. Apparently the same way minimalism did, with people like Reich and, Philip Glass and Meredith Monk. And minimalism had a sense of warping time and a sense of compressing it. So it does something to time. And one time in a think tank, I asked Evan Mazunik, a wonderful sound painter, to see how close he could come to 3 minutes. Like, can you feel 3 minutes? Can you feel, because I can feel an hour. I don't need to think about it. It just happens naturally. I feel it, and I'm really close to an hour, if not right on the button. And so we did this in the think tank. Evan, can you try 3 minutes? And Evan nailed 3 minutes, just like that. And then to add one more short story to this, about 10 years ago, I was doing a number of compositions with Anthony Braxton. He was a guest of my orchestra in New York. And he likes to use a sand timer when he does a performance. So he takes a big sand timer and turns it over. It's an hour sand timer. And at the end of the hour, with his group, this big group that he has, the concert's over. The last grain of sand, whoop, concert's over. He brought that, because we were collaborating on 6 different performances, and he brought this sand timer. And so this is over here, it's present. It's in my periphery the entire time. It completely messed up my composing because it put me in the moment. Because I could see this thing, slowly going down, and it brought me to the moment. And the one thing about live composing is you don't think about the moment. You have to be out here. Your thought process has to be out in front of you. If you're back here mind chattering, talking to yourself about stuff, reflecting on what just happened, it's the wrong state of mind, and you will lose the composition. It'll run away from you. So when it comes to time, once you start a composition in sound painting, the clock is ticking, and hang on and don't think about the time. Just think about what it is you have to do. So it does something very, very different to time because of one's involvement, but it gives you an uncanny ability to feel time.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing. It's great. I love it when you say those stories. Please tell more stories. So just one thing that I wonder is if you were talking about byproducts, and I wonder if you can remember any story or anything, any fact that you never thought that sound painting would achieve that or go at that place, something that you never thought it was possible, and then it surprised you.
Yeah, I have a story that I've told a bunch of times, really, and so when I started in the middle 90s, I got funding from an organization called the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation, and they gave me a lot of money for a lot for an artist, right? To develop sound painting, to go into an art colony in the summer for a month, invite people there to work on the language with me. And then 10 weeks prior to that, to the time at the Berkeley Arts Colony in Woodstock, 10 weeks prior to that residence, I would be in the public schools, 2 different schools a week. So I was in the school in Saugerties, New York. And my mission was to go into everyday classroom, to bring creativity to children. I think creativity is a cup of coffee we must have every morning. That's the first thing to start the day is creativity for children. And then the rest of then it gets their brain going, and maybe they're interested in other things after that because the brain is moving. And what better way to get the brain moving than to be yourself in a creative environment, right?
Sure.
So sound painting provides that, and everybody is equal. No one's better than the next. Everybody gets to join the group. No one's better than the next one. And so here I am teaching and going in for my first day into this class. I'm going to be there 10 weeks, 2 visits a week. And I'm told by the teacher and some other people as I got ready to come to the class the week before preparation, that there was a boy named Tim who was a select mute. He hadn't spoken outside of his home for 5 years. So I'm remembering that he was like about 11 years old or something like that. So I came into the classroom and the teacher said, don't really address Tim in any kind of way. Just leave him alone. Like don't make him special in front of everybody. And not that I would have done that, but thanks for telling me.
Of course.
So so the class is going to use their voice. It's not a music class, and they're going to bang on their desk and do different things for the different gestures. And Tim isn't going to use his voice. So it was like a Tuesday and a Thursday I came. So then Thursday came, and he came with a clarinet. So he has a clarinet now, so he can respond. Then other people, of course, Tim brings a clarinet, I'm going to bring my whatever. So I had a nice, colorful class for about 9 weeks or so. We were getting up around 75 signs. We went into second level language. They were learning gestures like play, can't play. And this is an everyday classroom, not a music class. And so then in the 9th week, in the 10th week, I wrote on the board, about 20 signs, and then I would ask each student to come up and choose 2 signs and do them with the group, with the class. And so then it comes Tim's turn to come up. And I said, Tim, what would you take? What would you like? And he said, I'll take minimalism and pointillism. And he spoke.
Wow.
For the first time in 5 years.
No way.
Not a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. Nobody could get this boy to speak, nobody. And he spoke, and I could see, out of the side, the teacher's face just like fell on the desk, basically. It just like jaw unhinged and boom. And
Wow.
she was like, so I had no follow-up with that. It wasn't my business to follow up. But I thought about it a lot, like what got him to speak? Why would he speak? And of course I can just guess at it, that, he felt really safe with me, and that for all of these weeks, he got to really be himself over and over and over again without any judgment, because there's no judgment. Like if I do long tone, Guilherme, you play pointillism, I'll tell you, okay, that's pointillism. And then maybe the whole group do pointillism, boom. And now everybody does what you just did, your mistake, not a mistake anymore, as long as you keep going. And then we get back to long tone. And if you don't understand it, I explain it to you. And of course, you'll be able to do it. So this idea that there's no error in sound painting, wrong and strong, when you make an error, keep going with it. This is nothing new in performance. We've been doing this in performance for years, everybody. But to really apply this to a language, in this language, you make a mistake, it's not a mistake anymore. Whereas if you're playing a piece of music and you're supposed to play an F, but you play an F sharp, that's a mistake. The composer knows it too, but not in sound painting. The sound painter must adapt and accept immediately. So anyway, I got Tim to speak, and not on purpose. It wasn't my intention when I asked him, "What would you take?" I've been asking one child after the next, and I asked him, and he spoke.
Wow. That's
So that for me, that was one of the.
that's wonderful. That's
Yeah,
a great story. Thanks for sharing. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And
Thanks.
well, sorry for asking that. I wonder. I would like to know, because you were saying about wrong strong, and I totally believe it. But I wonder if you consider, or if you felt any way, any in any way frustrated on stage, or if any time in your that you can remember, you felt that everything went wrong, and something that it you couldn't deal with that.
I mean, early on, years ago, yes, of course, in the 1980s, when I was first developing sound painting and competing with Butch Morris, who was developing conduction at the time, I, in those days, yeah, sure. I mean, I would, one of the scientists called a mistake in sound painting, like, like palette one with one mistake, so if you're playing something and it's supposed to be an F and you purposely play an F sharp, so it's with one mistake. But I used to use this sign to indicate to my group that, no, that's not what I want. And I would look at them and go, like sign to them, come on, And when I used to ask for improvisation, they would not listen to each other. So I would take, like I'm here and pull my up like comedian harikari, right? And so it now that means organic development in sound painting. So I was saying, come on, everybody, you're killing me. Come on, listen to each other, because it was 30 people in my orchestra. It's hard for 30 people to think together, and improvise together. So, I mean, now I'm forgetting the question, but, but, oh yes, the frustration. So in those days, yeah, maybe because the language was so young and it hadn't really been developed. But today, never. It's because a sound painter that's fluent doesn't want anything. You accept everything. If you come into a performance, a composition you're about to start, and you want something, well, you should have written that down. Because there's no want. It's a bunch of people in front of you. You're going to throw out a sign. And if you want something in that sign before you throw it out, shouldn't be sound painting. You should be composing a palette and using that. I mean, that sounds a little tough in a way, but it's really important to not want, only to accept. So for a lot of years now, no, nothing ever
Wow.
Nothing.
Wow,
Zip.
that's great.
And you have to be able to do that, because if the tiniest thing bothers you uh, one time, there's going to be many other times other things similar are going to bother you, and it's going to get in the way of live composing, which is a matter of you have to take in everything and then choose what you want to use to further the composition. So you so what I do when I'm teaching composition, Francois Chenot and I teach composition class in Paris, and sound painting composition. One of the things that I do is I'll throw out a sign for the group to get started, and then the person that's going to be composing, the sound painter, I'll choose what I might think is the least interesting thing to work with,
Mm-hmm.
and then ask that person to continue and take the rest out, and then say, okay, now do something with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like I'm trying to choose something that I don't think they would have chosen. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
that's a little bit ambiguous, but nonetheless, I try to do that and say, okay, try to make something with that. So in sound painting, you have to look at every single part of what's going on and be able to compose with every part of it. If you're always choosing the same path of where to take your composition in the live format, it's going to be hard to progress or to have your composition really grow. And I feel like, in sound painting is like it's a great way to take a giant risk.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way to take a risk is to choose something that's going to make you,
Mm-hmm.
really have a difficult time to find the solution to that.
Yeah.
And when you find the solution to that choice, you've gone somewhere brand new.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And this philosophy definitely can be transposed to daily lives. I mean, if you understand that it's better to don't have expectations and to accept what you have, you learn to be grateful for what you have, and it's beautiful. It's very very nice philosophy.
Yeah, I'm good at it in sound painting, and I'm okay in life with it.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
Sometimes in the kitchen when I'm cooking, which is a hobby of mine, and it doesn't go exactly right, it comes out tasting like crap. That that really can happen, but it never happens with a sound painting group.
That's
It,
very interesting.
it never, you know what I mean? Like, well, it's me alone with my cooking, and and maybe something goes a little wrong. Well, I shouldn't have put that in there. I
uh,
mean, maybe it's not a great analogy, but when people are the information for the composition comes from the people,
mhm,
you know. So if I've ever come to a concert and I feel a little flat,
mhm.
I'm not the least bit worried, because I know the energy that's coming from the people, what they're going to offer is just going to wake me up. And it does every time. So, and then I'm energized and I'm off in the composition. So I'm feeling really like, oh, I don't feel like being here today, etc. It's no worries. Once I throw my hands up and start going, I wake right up.
That's very nice. Well, Walter, I want to ask you one last question, and it is a bit a geek question, and it's about a lexicon, the lexicon. If you find there is any kind of hidden jewel in the lexicon of sound painting, something that you find that is the most important, or not the most important, but something that shines within the huge lexicon of words.
How do you mean? Do you mean sort of theoretically that there's something that?
I mean, it's just a theoretical question, so you can address the way you want.
Something that shines. I would say that the thing that shines the most for me when it comes to live composing is that itself. Is that no matter how much we try to explain this to other people that are composing in a more traditional way, uh, even with people that are really fine improvisers,
Hmm.
uh, because that's self composition or it's group composition with others.
Hmm.
But when you're the composer, the one responsible for structuring the piece in real time, you're in front of a public, let's say, open form sound painting. There's no palettes, there's no talk, the group knows all the signs, and now you start up and now you're responsible to yourself, to the group. You want to be honest. You want to, don't try to figure out what the public wants. Just be honest and give what it is that comes from you as an artist. And that sort of state of mind, where you understand how flexible composition is when you're using a tool like sound painting, or there's the other tools like, the other one for me is like conduction. But sound painting, speaking of sound painting, since that's the one I use the most all the time, actually, the one I use mainly. I have a couple little conduction gestures I use. But there's something very special about being able to structure. When you look outside and I see everybody walking around, I'm here in my home in Höganäs, Sweden, right? And I'm seeing people walking around just kind of freely doing what they want, stuff, going through their lives. I mean, I can sign that look, I can sign that particular look. And so when you look around, and you're in the performance, and you realize that you can structure anything that goes on, anything that happens at all, if you're fluent with the language, that you can turn that into composition, like instantaneously, if you're fluent enough with the language, then, I don't know, there's something that haven't been able to explain to people that don't know the language, other composers. And they say, no, I understand what you're talking about. It's like, you do not understand what I'm talking about. You have to actually know the language in order to be able to understand what it does to your thinking. How it affects your thinking, of how you can, right now, like I'm saying, everything is kind of free and going as it wants to go. Now, I would call that maybe lazy improv or something, and then people just do what they want to do. But in sound painting, you can structure every single thing that's going on that stage. Anything that happens, somebody's movement, something that happens in the public, a cough. I mean, whatever happens can be instantly picked up by the composer and used, or not. And I don't know, for me, there's something, for addressing your question, for me, that's theoretically, that's one of the most fascinating things to me, is as a composer, to be able to compose with everybody and anything that comes at me. For me, that's I never get tired of that.
Yeah, man. That was great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Walter. And
You're welcome, Guilherme.
I just want to thank you a lot for participating in this series. It's a big honor to have you here. And I wonder if you have any last questions before we end.
Yeah, we got to get you to. You have to get to the think tank. I mean, it got canceled this year, but next think tank, I want. Don't forget to write, because I mean you've been doing this a long time. A question I have is for you. So what are you doing next with your sound painting? What's next for you?
I'm right now. I'm doing this study. I always considered myself a student of. I started with sound painting, then I went to conduction, and then I went to Santiago Vasquez technique, and then I went to the masters, and I searched about 15 different practices of conducted improvisation. So now I'm trying to understand better each one and how they relate to itself, and it's very interesting to understand that many of the techniques were created somehow in the same time by people who didn't even knew about each other. And one thing that I find it the most interesting is that the big majority of gestures, they look like the same. Like, one thing that is interesting is the break gesture is the same gesture in every language. Everyone.
Oh yeah,
The break gesture, this one is the
yeah,
same
yeah.
gesture in everyone, even from people that doesn't know about the other language, and this is crazy. And so what it is interesting me the most right now is that I started studying about gestures and signs, and then I understood there are two separate levels of comprehension and interpretation, and one is the meaningful gestures, something that you have a concept, you have like long tune or a word that or a syntax that mean that gesture, and then you have free gestures that like you use shape line and then you start to improvising with direct action gestures, direct interpretation. And well, there are some conductors who studied and created only free gestures, a technique with of composing and conducting without using any concept, without using any metaphors or directives. They would just wave their arms and kind of like a dance in front of people to interpret. And so I'm really interested how to combine those two levels of conducting with free gestures and free interpretation together with metaphors and directives. So that's where I'm right now. But I'm only one more student. And thank you for asking.
Yeah, yeah, well, you're welcome. And it's also really fascinating to me because, like I'm a purist with sound painting, and I mean, I know about Santiago's language, of course. I've studied some of that, and Butch Morris and I used to compete with each other and didn't like each other until the last few years of his life, and then found each other like brothers. And it's interesting because, yeah, there's people that, like when you go around to different countries, where they speak sort of a patois, there's like a combination of different, like what you're doing, what Evan Mazunik is doing also. He's combining Santiago's language and Butch's language and sound painting. And he uses all of them.
Hmm. Yeah.
So for me, what's rich now is that there's all these different languages out there. I mean, those are the three kind of more codified ones, but there's other ones also that are out there.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating that this is the time that we're in, and this is what artists are doing. They're finding another way to communicate and to compose with and to structure and to guide and everything.
Right.
So it's maybe 100 years ago we would all be hung by the toes,
Yeah, definitely.
in front of the mirrors. So I don't know, we might have been considered, something,
Yeah. Yeah.
aliens.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's sort of it's a part of the times right now that
Yeah.
I don't know. We want things immediately. We want things more quickly than, or whatever. I'm not sure what it is that drives this to be what's going on now, but to just Kuranomy has been around 2,000 something years. That's the first signing language. So the idea of signing comes way before notation, and it's kind of interesting that it's come full circle. And there's a lot of people, like you were saying, that have developed things so on their own without any knowledge of the others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
Yeah. It is fascinating indeed. And well, I'm always very thankful for Evan Mazunik for what he did for me. He received me in his home in New York back in
Right.
2011, and I've been with him for 1 month, staying in his house. He was super generous. He taught me a lot about sound painting, and he opened my doors, my eyes to the different practices that were around, and I'm super grateful for him. It was a super pleasure to be with him. Yeah, just want to say that, acknowledge that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Evan's a fantastic musician, fantastic live composer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. We don't see enough of each other. That's the problem.
Yeah. Okay. So, Walter, I really wish to thank you so much for your time and your great thoughts. And you, as always, very generous person and giving everything you have. Thank you so much. I hope to
Yeah,
see
you're
you
very welcome.
soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I hope to see you soon.
Okay.
And keep me informed with what you're doing.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much and stay safe. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Stay safe, stay healthy in this
Okay.
crazy time.
Yeah. All the good.
Ciao.
All good for you. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao, amigo.
Ciao.